Hey everyone, welcome back to DEMAS. John, thanks for being here with us.
Pleasure as always, sir.
Today, we're not actually going to be doing any techniques or anything like that. What we wanted to do today was talk about something called the Center of Percussion. Now, there's a couple different measurements on the blade and different parts that you can use. In the Italian tradition, you have this space, which is the extension from your thumb to your pinky, and that's an Italian unit of measurement called a palm-o. So it's like pommel, but with an O, palm-o. And the palm-o is individual to each person. One of the uses for the palm-o is for a slang term that we use, which is called the sweet spot. The sweet spot on a blade is about a palmo from the point, and when you're striking a soft target, person, something like that, and you're fighting, we want to use the sweet spot. So if we look at an Albion, so here's an Albion sword, and if we stretch out, the sweet spot is right about there on my blade. So when I'm striking a soft target, like a person, this is about where I want to hit, somewhere in this range. So if we break it up into the parts of the blade, this is the forte of the foible. I want to use the sweet spot to strike with because when I'm hitting my target, that gives me the greatest amount of snap into my blow, but yet gives me also the greatest amount of distance from my target, so that my defense is wider, longer against his counteraction. And the sweet spot is, like I said, individual. So for me, on this blade, there's my sweet spot right about there. For John, if he does the sweet spot, it's there. So he's a little bit further than me, but not by much. Go ahead and stretch it out all the way. And then rotate around your thumb and grab the blade there. Yeah. So he's about an inch further down the blade than me. And like I said, the sweet spot gives us a striking zone that we want to use. But that's only one of the striking measurements. The other is something called the Center of Percussion, or COP. And the Center of Percussion is a spot on the blade, and all blades are different, that if you slap the flat, it does not vibrate. We're going to go through some different swords. I'm actually going to put this one down and start with an earlier sword. Thank you. So the Center of Percussion, we want to know where that is, because if we can go with the Norman?
Yes, sir.
With the Center of Percussion, once I understand where that is on the blade, that tells me where I need to be in relation to my opponent for the greatest transfer of energy. And when we look at a sword, if we're holding it here and I slap it, there's one spot that doesn't vibrate, and it's right about there. There's my Center of Percussion, which is different than my pommel, which is different than my palm. I can hold on to these. So let me do that again. There's my Center of Percussion, and there's my pommel. So on this blade, the Center of Percussion and the pommel are very close. If I'm hitting a soft target, and I come through, I want to hit with my Center of Percussion, so I have the greatest snap into my blow. But if I'm hitting anything harder, like armor or mail or anything, another sword, I want to use my Center of Percussion. When I hit with my sweet spot, I get those vibrations that transfer through my blade, and those vibrations take some of the energy out of my strike and transfer it into the vibrations of the blade. Therefore, it's not going into my target. When I hit with my sweet spot, when I hit with my Center of Percussion, there's no vibration in the blade. All energy is transferred directly into the target. So once again, on this sword, there's my center of percussion. So when I hit, I want to be hitting there to drive all force into the target. And like I said, every sword's going to be different. We have several reproductions today and one original that I want to look at. This is the Tinker Norman from Cass Iberia. It doesn't have much of a distal taper, but it does have some. Rounded, rebaited, good for fencing with. And again, the center of percussion is right there. But then we're going to move from this chronologically just a little bit forward in time. And we're going to go to a sword made by Deltin. And this is an Italian one-handed sword. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. This one is sharp. Now, this isn't sharp like Tamashigiri sharp. This is sharp like I would want it if I was fighting on the battlefield with it. It's an old Deltin. I think this actually comes from before old man Deltin retired and his sons took over. With this blade, if I slap it, it's right about there. And you'll notice this one doesn't have a lot of motion to it. So there's my center of percussion. If my opponent has a sword, go and grab a sword. And I'm countercutting against their blow, so give me a slow blow. If I hit there, I'm defending it. Keep going. No, just at me. Just at me. I'm defending that so I can do something else. If I use my sweet spot and I come to, stop. Now I'm just taking chunks out of the top of my blade. If I step, I'm going to hit your sword this time.
Yes, sir.
So I step to the side and I hit it here at my sweet spot. I'm a little too close. That's why my wrist was bent. Let me do that again. Let's move this way just a little bit. There we go. Go ahead. You can see how his sword moves out, down and out. But if I hit it at my center of percussion, which on this sword is right about there, go ahead, do it again. What'd you feel?
I felt a lot more force transferring to my sword.
And I didn't hit any harder. Go ahead and do it again. Tell me if this is sweet spot or center of percussion.
Yes, sir. Center of percussion.
That was. Do it again. So you can watch how much his hand transfers.
Sweet spot.
Yeah. There's a distinct difference in the way they move.
I have control of my sword still with the sweet spots area there, so I'm a little bit offline, but I actually can feel that I can bring my sword back into play. And the center of percussion struck, I was thrown out of my structure.
Let's go ahead and do it one more time. Center of percussion. Go ahead.
Yeah.
It just really changes the interaction of the blades. Now, what I was doing specifically there was working to catch him on the flat. So I have little damage to the edge, but not very much. So this is the Italian one-handed sword made by Deltin. From there, we're going to move, thank you, into the Albion. So this is, I believe, the Lichtenauer. If it's not, please clarify for me. But with this one, it's a thicker piece. It's beefier. It's definitely heavier. It's meant for continued fencing with. But when I slap the forte to find the center of percussion, and where I'm slapping is right there at the forte. I'm not gripping it tight because that's going to, when I tense up, that's going to affect the way the blade moves. So I'm holding it lightly and slapping it with my palm. And with this one, you can really see the center of percussion. So if I do it sideways, you can see it again. It's right about there. So with this one, the center of percussion is right there, which means that's really far down the blade. You can see how far from the point that is. That's getting more towards the center. This is, I would say, the foible of the mesa for this center of percussion, which is quite extreme, very far back. When I understand where this center of percussion is, this means I need to use my sense of balance and my footwork to put me in the correct position so that I can hit the target and transfer the greatest amount of energy, if that's my intention. I've been in sword fights where Blow, it was a one-handed side sword, Blow was coming in at me, and I stepped to the side and I hit the sword with my sword. And if you've been doing HEMA, WMA for any amount of time, you've seen a sword break. Usually when the sword breaks, it tings and goes flying off into the distance. In my time practicing, when I've hit another sword, I've broken 3 swords. And all 3 times, it was unintentional. Let me just point that out there right away. It's because I stepped to the side and I countercut their sword, just like I was doing earlier. Their sword broke. They were old swords, they weren't new. But when they broke, the top of the blade went straight down to the ground and landed by my feet. It didn't go flying off into the distance. Everything was driving down. And that's because, unintentionally, I struck with my center of percussion, not my sweet spot. And again, with the Albion, you can see how far down the center of percussion is on this blade. These are really nice for using when you're fighting in armor. And if they say you hit somebody in the helmet with your sword and you're not going to do anything to them, I disagree with that. If I step in, and I know because I've done this, if I step in and I lay my center of percussion on his head, it is going to rock his world. And so, because I'm transferring all that energy, it works really well going into the armor. Historically, their metal wasn't as clean as ours. Normally, there was some really good metal, but we have better technology today for creating that clean metal. So if I use my center of percussion and I hit my opponent on the shoulder and I bend it a bit, that's going to make it just a little more difficult for him to move that arm. And that's going to slow him down just a little bit, which can be my opportunity to then transfer to something else and put my point into play, because he's now just a little late in his ability to move since I used my center of percussion and bent his armor. So again, this is the Albion with a fairly low center of percussion. From this one, we're actually going to move to a lutel. And unfortunately, Jan at lutel got really sick and they have had to close. They were making some exceptional swords, thank you, sir, for use in reenactments over in Europe. And this is my lutel. Love this sword. But when you look at the center of percussion on this one, again, stopping it at the flat, there's my center of percussion right there. Can you get the Albion? And let's do that again. So for me, there's my center of percussion. And it's nice because it's actually right on that knob. So if I'm using this, it's really going to transfer a lot of energy. So let's go ahead and do it. Ready? Mm-hmm. Where's yours?
Right here.
Yeah. That's a pretty distinct difference in the center of percussion. Let's do it one more time. Mm-hmm. There's mine.
Right about there, yeah.
Yeah. 2
I'm
inches?
about 2 inches down from yours, yeah.
That means for the Albion, using the center of percussion, you have to be 2 inches closer to the opponent. And in a fight, how important is 2 inches?
2 inches is very important there.
Life or death, right?
Yep.
you stick a point 4 inches into a human being, and you'll hit something vital. In 1487, Filippo Vadi uses the term stramazzone, harassing cut. And a harassing cut is like a 1/4 of an inch. So about that much of the point going through your face. I'm a lot softer than they were. That I consider a lot more than harassing, if that's going through my flesh. So you can see the difference between the Lutel and the Albion. This one, I would not use in armor. I would want something a little heavier like that one in armor. This is a very good unarmored sword. From these, we're going to move into the one-handed. And with the one-handed, we're going to start with this. This is called a messer. Several of my friends, they love these. Robert Brooks, Scott Brown. I mean, this is a real popular sword. One-handed sword, this thing that comes over the knuckles is called a nagel to protect their finger. One-handed sword, when I slap it, there's my center of percussion. So let me do that again. Right there. Now, this one has this little cutout like a Bowie knife. This is a back edge. The Germans probably have a name for it, but I don't know what it is. So this is the back edge. It has only one edge, so it has a spine. And the center of percussion is right there, not too far behind the back edge. So that means when I'm striking somebody, I want to be hitting them with this part of my blade. Here's the other nice thing about a sword like this, or even a falchion. It has that belly. And this right here, right below the end of the false edge, is generally the widest part of the belly. So this puts the center of percussion just behind the widest part, which means when I hit something, all this weight here is driving into it, really giving a good strike with the center of percussion. Can you grab the tinker? So if my opponent swings at me, right, and go ahead, I set it to the side and then I drive down, that puts my center of percussion right into his head. But again, I have to be significantly closer because we have one-handed swords. Go ahead and do that again. Mm-hmm. Then from here, and that just lays my center of percussion. Let's switch sides. Do that again. Right into his face. Because I understand where the center of percussion is on my blade, that tells me where I want to interact with his blade. Can you do that again? Mm-hmm. So what I just did here, go slow. I step out and I capture it almost flat. So I'm not edge up. Go ahead and push through on me. You see how my sword flexes back towards me? Do it again. Now my sword is flexing, but it's not moving. Go ahead and relax. So when he throws that blow,
same pace.
Yeah, that you were doing. Okay. I'm going to cover and take that arm, and my defense went from here. I covered onto his arm, just around my head, and then just drive it right into his head, and I hit with the center of percussion.
That would mean everything that you've built up as potential energy in your cut is now completely transferred to me, and there's no vibration back into your blade.
Right. Now, with this one, because of the false edge, the center of percussion is just below it, which means if I'm using my false edge, I'm not going to be using my center of percussion. But, give me that blow slow. I step around and I use a false edge, which I've done to him, and nobody likes. Like Britain. Slow. This was coming through, and that was my strike right there. Well, actually, it was right there. Right there. Here, I was going for his bracer because I didn't want to hurt him. We were fighting, and that was my target right there. So that's at the edge of my false edge, at the back of my false edge. that would be my center of percussion. So with my false edge, I'm using just in front of my center of percussion. Give me that blow again. That gives me right at my center of percussion. So if he's swinging that out, do it again, slow. That just lands right there.
That would be my hand gone.
And so when we look at these manuscripts where you see, like Talhofer, the guy's hand leaving, I can do it with my sweet spot, but it's much stronger if I use my center of percussion. Yeah?
Yeah.
That's going to move us to our next sword. And we have two different pieces here. They are both Scottish. One is a reproduction from Cass Iberia, and the other is an original 18th century basket hilt. So this is the original broadsword. You can see it's got quite the angle to it. And what's interesting about this one is if you look at it, there's a big notch missing right there. It looks like he hit something. There's still a notch in the blade, but you can see the shape of the blade, how it's been sharpened out. And I want you to remember that spot right there, because with this sword, if I slap it, there's my center of percussion. And that's just about at the edge. There's the deepest part of it. My center of percussion is right there. On that one, now this is a backsword. And on this one, where's the COP on that?
Let's go ahead and find this guy. So my COP is right here.
Do it again?
Sure.
Yeah. So now, these swords, pretty much the same length. When I do mine is right there. So just a little bit above.
Tiny bit above it.
But again, when you look at the angle of the blade, let me stand in front of it to try to get rid of that. You can see where the sharpening was done, and it's pretty much at the COP. That tells us that historically, at least with this sword, that's where they were doing a lot of their striking. My friend Paul McDonald has created a reproduction of a sword that he had in his shop, which there's a great story of that a Scottish soldier during the 18th century War of Independence, the Jacobites, leapt off of a log and chopped into a British soldier's helmet and cut through the helmet and into his skull. And there was a chunk taken out of the blade. It was a real famous sword, real famous story. We can get more on that if you're interested. But he had that original sword in his shop and then was able to make perfect reproduction of it. And I've been able to hold it and play with it, and it's an amazing sword. So when you look at the originals, you can see, again, it's just such a deep divot right there where they were trying to get those notches out of their blade. So here we see the center of percussion on an original versus a reproduction. Pretty close, but there's a distinct difference between these two blades in the quality of the blade. On that one, can you grab the tip and flex the tip? See, so it flexes. Go ahead, do that again. There, right? Would you agree?
Yeah.
On this one, when I do it,
That would be about there, right?
Yeah, that's where I see it. So a distinct difference between these two. Now,
Almost half the size.
we do need to take into account that this is a broadsword and that's a backsword. That will affect it because it has a spine, whereas this doesn't have a spine. We have a video up here looking at 3 backswords, 2 reproductions, and an original. So there's a center of percussion on 2 basket hilts. And that brings us to our last sword for today. And this is a Hungarian saber from a gentleman I met in SoCal, Southern California, at SoCal Sword Fights, Michael. He created this. It's a lovely piece and a lot of fun to fight with. Very light, very fast, very agile. Has flex, which is nice because it's designed to fence with. But when we slap this one to check the center of percussion, it's right about there. Yeah, it's right about there, which is almost the middle of the blade. And that could be because it's curved. Could be the way it's built. I'm not sure, but it's a fun sword to fight with. He did an amazing job on it. But you can see with the curved sword, it's way down here, almost to the middle of the sword. So the center of percussion is the part of the blade that when you slap it, does not vibrate, which means all energy is transferred directly into the target and no energy is lost through vibration. I had the opportunity to be on a show with Adam Savage, and I was teaching him how to swing a sword that he helped create or helped build, made out of meteorite. And he wanted to cut through some bottles of water and wasn't able to cut through them. So then it was my turn. And it took me 4 tries. And they were kind enough to put up the best of the cuts. But what happened is on the first one, I pulled my shoulder, so I was like Babe Ruth spot. And so I cut through it, but it was wavy. It was an ugly cut. And I was looking at that to figure out, why is that so ugly? And why is it not clean? Then I realized what I'd done. I hit at the sweet spot. So I took one more cut. And this one I hit at the center of percussion. And I went through, I left the base sitting there with, it was at a steep angle, one-handed sword, with about that much at the bottom of the cut. And the water had actually built like a bubble there at the cut. And it didn't slosh, didn't do anything, it just sat there. That's because I used the center of percussion and all energy was transferred in. No energy was lost through vibrations like on the cut before that. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the center of percussion, what it is, why it's important, and how you can utilize it in your fencing, unarmed and armored. And with that, we're going to close up. Do you have anything you want to add?
Taking a deeper look at kind of the plays of the center of percussion was kind of a couple of things. Let's go with HEMA and WMA there for doing cutting, like tatami cutting or anything there, which is, what's the name of it?
Tamashigiri.
It's tamashigiri, just with a straight sword.
Yeah.
But to get that clean cut, they're always finding the center of percussion so that they can transfer easily through the tatami mounts. That's not, say, skin or anything.
Yeah.
But taking a look at that there as the context of, if I know my center of percussion and my sweet spot, then I actually know the measure for a perfect stessa tempo action.
Yeah.
If I can find their blade with my center of percussion and a target with my sweet spot.
Yeah. And that's all done through
footwork.
Yeah. Everything comes from your feet. But understanding the mechanics of your blade tells you how to use your feet.
Very much so, because now I know, am I working defense? Well, I'm going to strike with my center of percussion to their blade so that I can get it further from my body while I still stay within my center. And if I am working to the target, to a soft target, my sweet spot's the most optimal to be able to play, because now I am the furthest from that portion there, so they have more time. So there's more time for them to retaliate to me.
Another thing to remember with the sweet spot versus the center of percussion, if I'm fighting a human being, I can cut their arm off, I can cut their leg off at the knee. We have stories of that from Roman and Viking periods. But honestly, I don't need to. All I need to do is break his arm and he's not using that anymore.
Yeah.
Then I can do after the fight whatever I need to do. Run away, he can run away. I don't need to cut it off. That being said, I did hear a story from a friend of mine, Professor Bruno. He would study with the machete masters up in the mountains of Venezuela. And he was telling me a story that one of those masters was telling him. This master watched a duel in the streets up in the mountain village in Venezuela with machetes. And the way it was described, it was like right out of Tallhofer. Give me because you're cutting all the way through. And he just cut his wrist right there. Just took his wrist right off and severed the guy's hand. Great. The problem, do it again slow. He just did that and took his hand off. The severed hand kept going and cut his throat. Because, he hit the wrist, but he didn't use his feet.
Because he stood still and he just stayed inside of the angle of attack.
Yep. Or even changed the angle of attack. Because if you're swinging down at me and I hit with my center of percussion there,
that is not going to change.
Well, this is going to rotate.
Yeah.
And look at that blow right there. So that's why, do that again. That way when it continues down, it misses me. So I want to know where my center of percussion is so I can use that to guide my feet to give me not just the greatest offensive action, but to include my defense within that action. And with that, I think we're going to close up.
Sounds good.
So thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you find it useful. Stay safe, stay sane as much as possible, and we'll see you on the other side. All the best to you and yours. Boom.
Hope you guys enjoyed it.